What if the open road isn't as empty as you think? Truckers spend night after night watching the darkness shift in their mirrors, and sometimes what they see can't be explained away. Picture a voice calling out from behind you on Route 50, or a figure standing just beyond the reach of your headlights. These aren't just stories. They're moments that leave drivers changed for good, turning routine hauls into something you can't shake off. Would you ignore every alarm in your gut if something was following you? For some, one encounter is all it takes to change how they drive forever. Brian Carter had crossed the Nevada desert more times than he could count. The roads out there felt endless, stretching flat and straight beneath a sky that swallowed every sound. That night, the only company was the hum of his engine and the faint glow of dashboard lights. He caught a shape in the side mirror, a shadow wide and low, drifting just behind him. It wasn't headlights. It was something darker, almost as if the night itself had thickened into a solid form. Brian leaned forward, adjusting his mirrors for a better look, and that's when he spotted it. A matte black semi-truck with no license plates, no logos, nothing to mark where it came from or who might be driving. At first, he chalked it up to another trucker headed for the same distant stop. He kept his focus on the road, but the feeling didn't go away. When he changed lanes to pass a slower rig, the black truck changed lanes too. He moved back, and so did it. The truck kept its distance, never getting close enough for Brian to get a clear look, but always there, matching his every move. It didn't flash its lights or signal, just drifted along, silent and blank. Brian's grip on the wheel tightened. He'd seen plenty of odd things out here. Strange lights, weird drivers, but nothing that made his skin crawl like this. He checked his speed, made sure he wasn't just tired or seeing things, and tapped his brakes gently to see if the truck would react. It did. The black rig slowed when he slowed, sped up when he did, and drifted into the same subtle veers. It was like looking at a shadow that refused to let him go. The desert felt bigger than ever. There was nothing but sand and sagebrush on either side, no lights on the horizon, no towns for miles. Brian tried to reason with himself, running through every possibility. Maybe it was just a bored driver, maybe someone playing a prank. But the way the truck mirrored him, the way it never revealed anything about itself, made that hard to believe. The whole stretch of road felt suddenly hostile, like he was being hunted. He made a decision and signaled early for the next rest area. The black truck stayed behind him, holding that same unnerving distance. Brian slowed, watching in the mirrors as he eased off the highway. For a moment, the truck lingered at the edge of the ramp. Then, between one glance and the next, it was gone. No headlights, no taillights, no sound, just empty darkness. Brian's chest tightened as he realized how alone he really was out there. He sat for a minute, engine off, listening to the wind scrape across the lot. The other trucks were just shapes in the dark, their engines humming quietly. Inside the rest stop, Brian told his story to an older driver at the counter. He expected disbelief or a joke, but the man just stirred his coffee and looked up with tired eyes. "Why would a truck with no plates hunt someone in the desert?" Brian asked, not sure he wanted an answer. The old-timer's voice was low. "You saw the Phantom rig. Been out here for decades. Nobody knows why. Nobody knows who's behind the wheel, if there's even anyone there." Brian didn't sleep much that night. Every trip after, he kept his eyes on the mirrors, waiting for that blank shape to return. Out on the highway, sometimes it's not what you see that keeps you awake. It's what you can't explain. And for drivers like Brian, the road's silence doesn't always mean safety. Sometimes it's just the pause before something happens. There are nights when the road feels empty, but every trucker knows that's not always true. Some dangers are easy to spot. Others show up when you least expect them. Sometimes when you're just trying to get a little rest. Jessica Miller thought she'd picked a quiet place to park for the night. The Arkansas rest area was nearly empty. Just her semi and a solitary sedan parked near the entrance. She chose a spot away from the lights, hoping for a few undisturbed hours of sleep. After a long haul, her eyelids felt heavy, and the low hum of the highway faded as she drifted off. At 3:12 in the morning, a sharp, persistent tapping jolted her awake. The sound came from the passenger side window. Jessica blinked, trying to shake the grogginess, and saw a man standing outside. His face was hidden by a hood, and his voice was muffled through the glass. "Hey," he said, flat and insistent. "My car broke down. Can you give me a lift to the next exit?" Even half awake, Jessica's instincts told her something was off. She shook her head, signaling no, but he didn't leave. Instead, he moved closer, his hand pressing against the door handle. "Just open up. I need a ride," he demanded, his tone growing more urgent. Jessica's heart pounded. She checked the locks, grateful they were secure. He stepped away for a moment, but instead of leaving, he circled around to the driver's side, checking each door. Jessica slammed her hand on the horn, hoping the sudden noise would scare him off, but he barely flinched. He disappeared behind her cab, and she lost sight of him. The darkness outside felt heavier, the rest area quieter than she remembered. Then came the scraping, metal on metal. Jessica realized he was at her trailer doors, trying to pry them open with something heavy. She could picture the crowbar in his hand, even if she couldn't see him. Her mind raced through every safety drill she'd learned, but nothing ever felt real until now. She grabbed her phone, fingers shaking, and dialed 911. Her voice was unsteady as she gave her location and described what was happening. The dispatcher's voice stayed calm, telling her to stay put, keep the doors locked, and wait for help. Every second felt like an hour. What if he broke in before help arrived? She pressed the horn again, holding it down, hoping to draw attention from anyone nearby. The scraping stopped, but she couldn't see where the man had gone. Minutes crawled past, each one stretching longer than the last. But would help really come in time? When the blue and red lights finally swept across the parking lot, Jessica felt her breath catch. Officers found the man hiding behind a dumpster, crowbar still in hand. He was taken into custody, but the relief didn't erase what had happened. The ride back onto the highway felt different. Jessica stopped using rest areas at night. She started choosing well-lit, busy truck stops, and even then, she checked her mirrors over and over before letting herself relax. She never forgot how quickly a familiar stop could turn dangerous, or how a simple wrong turn in someone else's night could end up changing the way you see the road. Eli Thompson didn't expect anything out of the ordinary when he set out to haul lumber through the back roads of West Virginia. He'd handled plenty of rough routes before, but this time, his GPS was supposed to make things easier. That changed fast. The screen froze, then flickered with static, the route recalculating in jerky fits. Instead of correcting itself, it sent him off the main highway and deep onto a twisting, unfamiliar road. At first, Eli tried to brush it off as a minor technical hiccup. But as the sun dropped and the sky turned gray, the road kept getting narrower. The trees pressed in so close that branches dragged along the side of his trailer. Fog rolled down the hills like a living thing, thick enough to blur the world outside and turn his headlights into a weak, useless glow. He stared at the GPS, hoping for a fix, but the screen fizzed and then went black. Now he was alone with just the road and the sound of branches scraping metal. A small house appeared on the roadside, its windows glowing faintly in the dusk. Eli slowed and pulled over, letting the engine idle. An older man stepped onto the porch, shotgun resting in one hand. Before Eli could say anything, the man called out, "You're not the first to get turned around out here, but you need to leave. Now this road isn't safe after dark." The warning wasn't shouted, but it landed hard. Eli watched the man's face for any sign of a joke, but there was nothing but a closed, serious look. He thought about asking what he meant, but the man's posture told him not to bother. Eli climbed back into the cab and started driving, but the road felt even more claustrophobic now. The fog pressed closer, thick and heavy. Each mile took longer than the last. He gripped the wheel tighter, sweat breaking out on his forehead. That's when he noticed faint shapes moving in the mist beside the truck. At first, he told himself it was just shadows or tricks of the light, but the feeling that he was being watched wouldn't go away. His heartbeat picked up, and he leaned forward, trying to focus on the narrow ribbon of road ahead. Suddenly, headlights appeared behind him, weaving through the trees just off the road. They bobbed and flickered, moving in ways that didn't make sense for any car or truck. Eli tried to spot a road back there, but the lights vanished every time he turned to look. The sense of being boxed in grew stronger, as if the fog and the woods were working together to keep him there. He finally found his way back to a main road hours later, heart still pounding. The old man's warning echoed in his mind, and the fog and those vanishing lights stayed with him long after. He never trusted a GPS shortcut again. Fear taught him that not all detours are accidental. Sometimes, the road itself seems to warn you away. But not every threat on the highway is as obvious as a wrong turn or a shadow in the mist. Mark Sullivan didn't make a habit of pulling over on I-70 at night, but that late September run through Kansas felt different from the start. The highway stretched out in front of him, empty and silent under a star-filled sky. There was no other traffic, just the steady hum of his truck and the endless fields on either side. He kept his eyes on the road, expecting nothing but darkness, until he saw movement in the ditch to his right. He slowed almost without thinking. There was a woman standing in the grass, barefoot, wearing a white sundress that caught the headlights. She didn't wave right away. Her shoulders were hunched, and she looked out of place like she'd wandered in from somewhere far away. As Mark's truck rolled closer, she turned toward him, her hair tangled and her face streaked with dirt. She stepped forward, lifting her hands, and her voice came out raw and desperate. "Help me." Mark eased his rig onto the shoulder, heart pounding. The woman moved closer, her bare feet silent on the gravel. She stopped just outside the beam of his headlights and whispered, "Don't let him find me." The words didn't make sense, but the fear in her voice was enough to freeze him in place. He wanted to ask who she meant, to offer help, but before he could do anything, she crossed in front of the truck. Her eyes met his, wide, pleading, and then she was gone. One moment she was there, the next, nothing. No sound, no movement, not even a shadow left behind. He fumbled for his phone, desperate to find any sign of life in the grass. He got out, boots crunching on the gravel, and swept his flashlight through the ditch and the tall weeds. He called out, voice low and shaky, but the only answer was the wind. There weren't any footprints, no sign that anyone had stood there at all. Mark stood still for a few seconds, trying to convince himself he'd imagined it, but the panic in her voice still echoed in his head. Was she real? Or something that shouldn't exist on a lonely highway? Mark got back in the cab and sat behind the wheel, hands shaking. He didn't drive off right away. Instead, he stared out at the empty road, waiting for something else to move in the darkness. Nothing did. The next morning, he told his story to another driver at a truck stop. The man didn't laugh or roll his eyes. He just nodded and said, "You saw her. There's a story about a girl who died out here. People say she still tries to flag down help." Mark didn't argue. He didn't want to. The whole thing left him uneasy, questioning if every cry for help on the highway was what it seemed. After that night, Mark stopped pulling over for strangers, no matter how desperate they looked. Some things out there can't be explained, and sometimes the road offers up mysteries that follow you for miles. Other drivers have their own stories. Sometimes it's a strange figure in the dark. Sometimes it's something even harder to believe. Tyler Brooks was used to long stretches of empty highway in the Texas Panhandle, but the night he spotted 3 identical white semis moving in perfect formation, something about the scene made him uneasy. Their paint looked too clean, untouched by dust or bugs. He checked for company logos, DOT numbers, anything to explain who they belonged to, but there was nothing. Just 3 blank trucks, side by side, moving with a kind of precision that felt unnatural. He kept his distance at first, watching the way they changed lanes together, never breaking formation. When he sped up, they matched his speed. If he drifted back, they slowed too. Tyler tried to get a look at the drivers, but the cabs were dark and the windows so heavily tinted that all he saw was his own headlights reflected back. He caught himself staring, searching for any sign of life behind the glass, but there was nothing to see. Curiosity got the better of him. He reached for his CB radio and called out, trying to keep his tone casual. "White convoy up ahead. You guys heading out west?" He braced himself for a laugh or a jab, but only static answered, worse than silence. He tried again, a little more direct. "Looks like you're making a run tonight. Anybody copy?" Still nothing. The radio hissed quietly, and the trucks kept moving, locked into their strange dance across the asphalt. It wasn't just the silence that bothered him. The way the convoy mirrored his moves felt deliberate. If he changed lanes, so did they. If he signaled for an exit, the trucks would keep pace until the very last moment, as if testing him. The highway was empty except for the 4 of them, and the lack of any other lights or traffic made the whole thing feel even more isolated. He started to wonder if he was being followed, or if he'd stumbled into something he wasn't supposed to see. The trucks never got too close, never drifted apart. Their coordination was flawless, as if they were being controlled by the same unseen hand. Tyler's hands tightened on the wheel. He thought about pulling off at the next exit, just to break free from whatever game they were playing. What would you do if 3 phantom semis mirrored your every move? When the exit sign finally appeared, Tyler made a quick decision and took the ramp. He watched in his mirrors, half expecting the trucks to follow, but they kept going, straight into the darkness. Their taillights faded and then vanished, as if they'd never been there at all. He stopped for gas a few miles down the road, still unsettled. The attendant behind the counter listened to his story without much surprise. "You're not the first," the man said. "Those trucks have been seen out here for years. Some folks say they're government. Others say they're something else. But nobody ever sees where they come from or where they go." Tyler left with more questions than answers, replaying the night over and over in his mind. Sometimes, the road gives you silence when you need answers most. And sometimes, the only voice you hear out there is your own, echoing back through the radio static. Olivia Grant preferred the quiet of late-night hauls, especially on Route 50 in Utah. The road stretched on for miles, the desert pressing in on either side, and she'd grown used to the steady hum of her engine and the soft static of her CB radio. At just past 3 a.m., the silence was almost comforting. That's when the radio crackled to life with a sound she didn't expect. A voice, thin and trembling, threading through the static. "Can anyone hear me?" The voice was male, barely audible, and carried a note of desperation. Olivia glanced at the green glow of her radio dial, trying to figure out if it was just a stray signal. The static faded, and the man spoke again, his words shaky. "I'm lost. I think I ran out of gas. Please, is anyone out there?" Usually, Olivia would have answered without hesitation. Truckers looked out for each other, especially on deserted stretches like this. But something about the voice unsettled her. The plea was simple, but the way it sounded, thin, almost not human, made her pause. She wondered if it was a prank, or maybe just someone trying to mess with drivers, but her hand hovered over the mic before she pulled it away, shaking her head. She tried to focus on the road, telling herself it was nothing. Then the voice came back, and the tone had changed. "You hear me, don't you?" The pleading had sharpened, the words now edged with something cold. A cold shiver shot down her spine. This wasn't a forgotten hitchhiker. "Why won't you stop? I know you can hear me." Olivia's heart hammered in her chest. She looked in her mirrors, searching for headlights, but the road behind her was empty. She reached for the radio, thinking maybe it was all just a bad joke, but the next words made her freeze. "I'm right behind you." Her hands gripped the wheel tighter. The highway was as empty as ever, but now every shadow seemed to move. The voice returned, this time a whisper that sounded almost angry. "You shouldn't have stopped. You shouldn't have left me here." The words echoed in her mind, and she felt more alone than ever on that stretch of road. The rest of the drive blurred together. Olivia kept her eyes forward, refusing to answer the radio or look back. When she finally reached a diner, her hands shook as she wrapped them around a mug of coffee. She told her story to some older truckers sitting nearby. They listened in silence. Then one of them nodded. "Sounds like the night caller," he said. They explained that the night caller wasn't just a legend. Drivers believed it was the voice of a long-dead trucker, someone who died out there, still calling for help that never came. The story had been around for years, passed between drivers in late-night conversations. Olivia didn't argue. The memory of that voice, how it shifted from pleading to something almost hateful, stayed with her. Have you ever heard a voice when you were sure you were alone? Tell us below. Some drivers say the road can play tricks on you, especially when you're tired or the night feels too quiet. But others know what it's like to spot something out of place, even if it's just a shadow where it shouldn't be. Eric Daniels was cruising down I-95 in South Carolina when something in the median caught his attention. At first, he figured it was just a deer, crouched low in the grass. Wildlife along the highway never surprised him, but this time, the shape didn't move the way animals do. As his headlights swept across the median, the shape resolved into a person, arms wrapped tightly around their knees, head pressed down. The posture was so still, so deliberate, that Eric's instincts kicked in before he knew why. This wasn't animal behavior. This was a person choosing to wait, unmoving in the dark. He let his foot off the gas and leaned forward, squinting through the windshield. The figure didn't flinch or react to the sound of his engine. Instead, they sat there, as if they'd been waiting for someone to notice. As Eric drew closer, the figure slowly raised their head. For a split second, the face caught the glare of his headlights. Skin pale, eyes wide and unblinking, staring straight at him. He couldn't tell if they were looking at him or through him, but the chill that shot up his spine told him everything he needed to know. Eric's hands tightened on the wheel. He checked his mirrors, hoping to spot another set of headlights, someone else to share the burden of what he'd seen. The highway behind him was empty, just the painted lines and the faint glow of his own taillights. Should I go back? Would I regret stopping or driving away? The questions crowded his mind, each one heavier than the last. He hesitated, torn between the urge to help and the deep, gnawing sense that something was wrong. He kept driving. The image of that crouched figure burned behind his eyelids. The road felt longer than usual, the isolation pressing in from all sides. At the next truck stop, Eric found himself replaying the moment over and over. He slid into a booth across from another driver and tried to put what he'd seen into words. There was someone sitting in the median out on I-95, he said, voice low. Didn't move, just stared back at me. I didn't stop. The other driver's face tightened. Yeah, I know that spot. I've seen her too. He set his mug down and glanced away. Gave me the creeps. They say a woman died there, got hit years back. She never left. Folks see her sometimes, just sitting there. The story settled over Eric like a weight. Local legend said the woman's spirit was trapped, always waiting, always hoping someone would stop. He'd heard stories like that before, but they never felt real until now. The encounter left him uneasy, questioning his own judgment and the reality of what he'd witnessed. Even now, he finds himself scanning every median, haunted by eyes that belong to no one living. The highway doesn't always offer answers, and sometimes, what you see stays with you long after the lights of the next town appear in the distance. There are stretches of road where the ordinary can twist into something you can't explain, and all you can do is keep moving forward, hoping the next mile brings you back to the familiar. Sarah Whitman always thought she knew every inch of California's Central Valley. The almond orchards lined the highway for miles, their neat rows blurring past the windows until they felt like part of the background. But one night, as she drove through the flat stretch just before dawn, something unfamiliar caught her eye. There was a flicker out in the orchards, a sharp, shifting light that didn't belong. She watched it for a second, thinking it might be a reflection from her own headlights, maybe a stray bit of farm equipment or a distant house. But the light moved in a way that made her uneasy. It darted and circled just above the trees, not in any pattern she recognized. The movement was too precise, almost as if the orchard lights were aware of her passing truck. They split apart into smaller orbs, weaving between the branches, then clustered together again, hovering just beyond the reach of the road. Sarah slowed down, her hands tightening on the wheel. She rolled her window down a few inches, listening for any sound that might explain what she was seeing. There was nothing, no hum of machinery, no voices, just the steady rush of air and the low idle of her engine. The lights kept moving, sometimes speeding ahead, sometimes falling back, never quite letting her forget they were there. She felt exposed, as if the orchard lights were watching her every move. She considered pulling over, just for a moment, to get a better look. But something in the way the lights moved held her back. The fear wasn't sharp, more like a slow tightening in her chest. She pressed the gas, deciding she'd rather keep moving than risk getting a closer look at something she couldn't explain. At the next diner, Sarah tried to shake off the feeling. She ordered coffee and ended up sitting next to another driver, Linda, at the counter. The words came out before she could stop herself. Did you ever see lights out in the orchards? Not planes or trucks, something else? Linda didn't seem surprised. You saw the orchard lights, she said, as if it was just another part of the job. people have been seeing them for years. Sarah waited for more, hoping for a simple answer, but Linda just shrugged. No one knows what they are. Some say it's gas from the ground, some think it's spirits, others talk about UFOs. But nobody's ever really figured it out. They just show up. Sarah couldn't tell if relief or dread washed over her. Sometimes not knowing felt worse. Back in her truck, Sarah stared out at the dark fields before starting the engine. Why would lights in a farmland appear just for her? She kept her eyes straight ahead as she pulled back onto the highway, but the feeling of being watched lingered. She never looks too closely at the orchards anymore. Some places have stories that stay with you, even when you think you've left them behind. Some stretches of highway have their own rules, unwritten but impossible to ignore once you've seen what waits in the dark. Greg Lawson found that out one humid summer night, driving the long, empty road between Tulsa and Oklahoma City. The only sound was the steady hum of the engine and the weight of the loaded trailer behind him. The air pressed in, thick and silent, the kind of night where even the bugs seemed to hold their breath. He was alone with the miles, until he wasn't. Near mile marker 212, Greg's headlights picked out a figure on the shoulder. The man stood perfectly still, facing the road, his clothes faded, a flannel shirt and jeans that looked like they belonged to another time. His hair stuck out in wild tufts, and his skin looked almost colorless in the harsh light. Greg slowed as he passed, eyes drawn to the man's rigid posture. There was nothing casual about the way he waited. It was deliberate, like he'd chosen that spot for a reason. As the truck rolled by, the man turned his head and locked eyes with Greg. For a moment, everything in the cab seemed to freeze. Those eyes were dark and bottomless, not angry or afraid, just empty in a way Greg had never seen before. There was something else too, a sadness so deep it felt old, worn into the man's face until it was part of him. Greg's chest went cold, as if he'd stepped into a walk-in freezer. He kept his hands tight on the wheel, glancing at the mirror to see if the man was still there, half expecting him to vanish. He wondered if he should stop, if he'd regret driving on, or if stopping would be worse. He drove on. The image burned into his mind. At his next stop, Greg tried to shake off the feeling, but the man's face wouldn't leave him. He told the story to Pete, a driver he knew from the same route. Pete didn't laugh or look away. He just nodded. "Mile marker 212?" he asked. When Greg said yes, Pete said, "He's been standing there for decades. I've seen him myself. So have a lot of others." Greg listened as Pete explained that nobody really knew the man's story, only that he always appeared at the same spot. Some drivers said he was a ghost. Others figured he was just someone lost, stuck on a loop that never ended. Greg didn't ask for details. He didn't want them. All he knew was that every time he passed that stretch again, a cold knot formed in his gut as the marker came into view, like a countdown to something he couldn't escape. He found himself scanning the shoulder, half hoping, half dreading he'd see the man again. If you passed a lonely figure staring at the road, would you stop or drive on? Let us know what you'd do. Even the most ordinary places can leave their mark, especially when the past refuses to let go. And sometimes, it's not the haunted mile or the empty road that changes you. It's what happens next, when you think you're safe, and something unexpected calls you back. Ben Harper's story began at a quiet diner just off Exit 14 in Ohio, where the night felt ordinary until the payphone rang. It was shortly after midnight. The phone sat in the corner, its receiver hanging a little loose, the kind of relic most people ignored. The sound cut through the low murmur of the other drivers and the clatter of dishes. Ben looked over, surprised anyone would use a payphone at this hour. He hesitated, then picked up the receiver. A woman's voice came through, rushed and uneven. She sounded desperate, words tripping over each other as she pleaded for help. "Please, I need help. I'm at the old rest stop just past the exit. Someone's coming back. Please hurry." Her voice cracked, fear leaking into every syllable. Before Ben could answer, the line went dead. He stood there, phone pressed to his ear, trying to make sense of what he'd heard. The knot in his stomach tightened. Behind the counter, the waitress caught his eye. "That's strange. That phone hasn't worked in years," she said, her voice flat, as if it was just another odd thing about the place. Ben stared at the phone, the receiver still warm in his hand. If the phone was dead, who had called him? The air in the diner felt heavier, the ordinary night suddenly charged with something he couldn't name. He could have walked away, but the urgency in the woman's voice left him no choice. He got back in his truck and drove to the rest stop just past exit 14. The place looked abandoned, patches of cracked pavement and dead streetlights marking the lot. The building leaned, its windows broken, the silence pressing in from all sides. There was no sign of anyone, no car, no footprints, nothing to show that a woman had been there. Ben walked toward the payphone near the edge of the lot, half expecting it to be gone. Instead, he found it standing crooked, battered by years of neglect. That's when he noticed something in the weeds below the phone. A pale, torn scarf caught on a branch. He froze, heart pounding. This wasn't part of any prank. He picked it up, the fabric gritty with dirt, and stood there for a long minute, scanning the empty lot. There was nothing else to find. The only sound was the distant rush of traffic and the creak of the broken sign swinging in the wind. The next morning, Ben spoke with a local officer. The man didn't look surprised. "That payphone's been disconnected for years," he said. "People around here talk about a woman who was attacked there a long time ago. Every so often someone gets a call for help from that phone. Always late at night, always around midnight." Ben listened, the scarf still in his hand, the details settling in like cold rain. Ben left before dawn, the old phone's echo still ringing in his ears. He never told anyone else about the call, but the memory stayed with him. The road, once predictable, now felt different, like every forgotten stop might be holding on to something unresolved, waiting for someone to listen. Stories like Ben's remind us that the road can change in an instant. The next time you find yourself alone on a quiet stretch, you might start to wonder what's out there, waiting just beyond the reach of your headlights. Every highway story in this series showed how a single unexplained moment can change a person's life. From desert hunts to phantom phone calls, these highways taught our drivers that one night can change everything. Jessica Miller stopped trusting quiet rest areas. Mark Sullivan never pulled over for strangers again. The fear, suspicion, and anxiety lingered long after the engine cooled, shaping every decision that followed. Which story shook you the most, and how would you react if it happened to you? Share below. Next time you're alone out there, remember, some roads hold stories beyond our understanding.